Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence. I'm your host, Sarah Payne, a health marketing strategist at Imprella Communications, and I'm bringing you fascinating conversations with some of the industry's top marketing minds. Today's episode will be the first in a series of chats I'm calling the CMO Corner, where we'll tap insights and advice from some of the industry's most renowned chief marketing officers. Joining me today in the CMO Corner, I'm thrilled to welcome one of the most accomplished and respected chief marketing officers in all of healthcare, Marcia Miller. Marcia is a career healthcare marketer with strong experience leading a wide range of business challenges, from startup companies to Fortune companies to marketing agencies. She's seen and done it all. She's someone who knows how to effectively build a brand in this industry and also excels at building high-performing teams. Welcome, Marcia.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
We're going to touch on several different topics today, but the first thing I want to talk to you about, Marcia, is effective risk-taking for marketing success. I've witnessed that you are someone who's comfortable taking risk, and I admire that about you. So let's start with, how do you think about risk-taking in your role as a marketing leader?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic and question when you posed that you wanted to have this discussion. I think that there are people that are natural risk takers and there are people that are not. Don't you agree?
I agree.
And I think there are companies that are natural
Yes.
in risk taking and those that are not. So I think as we talk about risk, I hesitate to say that everybody should be a risk taker, right? I think that
Yep.
finding the right mix of where you want to work and how that matches with a company is critical. And I know a lot of really successful people who are not risk takers. And they've found their place at companies who don't need that
Yeah.
and don't value it probably as well. And so, you have this kind of fixed mindset that companies are in and a growth mindset. And I think figuring out what drives you as a marketer and as a professional and as a leader, and matching that up to the right kind of company is really important. I am a risk taker. I love risk. I would never take a fixed, same old kind of role because it doesn't feed me. So for me personally, I love growth. And I think those kinds of companies that want growth and they want innovation are companies that are more risk focused. And those are the kind of companies that I run to. And I run away from those companies that are not that. Not to say that that's not good. I think there are people who can build great careers in companies who really want an operator, someone to dig in and operate and kind of keep that rhythm of things rolling. That is not what drives me. So
yeah. I think you're so spot on about so much of that. I think a lot of it is innate or not in certain individuals, and a lot of it comes down to the culture you're in, the leadership around you. To that point, what advice do you have for people in terms of how to set expectations before they take on a role? You might know the leader that you're going to work with, and that's obviously an ideal situation, right? You've worked before, you sort of have that trust, and they know what they're getting, you know what you're getting into, but that's not always the case. And so what advice do you have in terms of how to set expectations before they take on a role? To set themselves up for success? What should someone negotiate? And I'm not talking about comp, right? Like yes, negotiate comp, but set that aside. What should someone be asking or negotiating and get sort of leadership buy-in to before they, take on a new role, so they have that autonomy to lead and drive the change that needs to happen inside of those, high growth, high innovation type of companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think, first you have to know yourself. So decide if you're more risk focused or not. I think we're here to talk more about risk. So let's assume everybody who's listening wants to be a better risk taker and wants to be part of that, right? That fun game of crazy. So I think that, for me, there are some things that are critical if I were to take a new role, especially as a marketing leader, that if I'm moving into a growth focused, whether that be a startup company or an early stage company or an established company, can still have that growth mentality.
Yes.
So I think there are a few things that absolutely have to happen in order for me to say yes to an opportunity. One of those is that the C-suite, including the CEO, needs to believe that marketing needs to sit at the leadership table.
Yes.
And if that is not the case, where the CMO is not reporting directly to the CEO and that marketing can't really impact and drive business, to me, then you become a cog, not a change maker. And so then the risk that you're taking on to really make something happen kind of goes away or softens if you get buried underneath all of that. And then you can't tell that great story to your team of all the
Yes.
things that you're trying to do and build, and they feel like you're sitting at that table representing them in a way that is meaningful, in a way that is change making. So I think that's super important as you think about risk and the kinds of companies that you want to be with. I also look for companies that where there's a lot of good alignment. Like, what are we doing, and do we all
Mhm.
believe that that is what we're here to accomplish, right? And if that's the case, and we're all holding hands, hands in the middle, let's go, man, that is so fun. I mean,
Yes.
there is nothing better than a strong leadership team that is aligned and that values what everybody brings to the table. If you can find that and you feel that through that interview process, my gosh, don't let that go
Yes.
because it's hard to find. And I think that's, super exciting. So, know what you're in it to do and know what that long game looks like, So, I always say that over the years, I've come to realize what I'm good at. I'm good at building teams. I'm good at building brands. I'm good at building companies. I may not be as good at running them, but that gets to your risk thing. The build of that could take 5 years, right? Uh,
Yes. Yep.
so I think, what's that long game that you are going to, come hell or high water, deliver on? And if the long game is a sale, if the long game is a revenue goal, if the long game is a product introduction or an innovation around something, if you know that and everybody's aligned around that and you're sitting at the leadership table, I don't think you can fail.
I love that. So, two things you mentioned, having a seat at the table, strong alignment with the leadership team. You're so spot on with both of those things, but, uh, you know, where you're at in your career today, Marcia, obviously, you know these things, you know yourself, and you know to look for these things. But
Yeah,
perhaps it hasn't always been that way, maybe earlier on in your career. Were there Are there any experiences you can share where you walked into an environment where marketing didn't have the seat at the table or there wasn't strong alignment? And did you have any the alignment piece is a bit harder, right? To
that's hard.
for
You don't
a
even
leader,
know until you're in it. Yeah.
right? But the seat at the table, let's take that one as an example. Was there ever an
Mhm.
environment where that wasn't the case and you were able to sort of convince and make that change where marketing went from not having a seat at the table to earning the seat at the table?
I mean, I think that there's probably many examples of where I've come into situations where marketing wasn't sitting at the business table. We're buried down in the weeds, and I think that and sometimes I was not in the role to sit at that table. I was, on the team underneath of that too.
Sure, sure.
And so I guess I've seen kind of both sides of that coin and how different that is. When a strong leader in a marketing realm can sit at that business table, and what a difference that makes.
Any advice for people who might be listening who maybe, are in that situation where marketing doesn't have the seat at the table, things they could be doing, conversations they
Yeah.
should be having, questions they could ask?
I mean, I guess really you have to prove it.
Yeah.
You have to prove that the value is there for that to sit, for you to be sitting at that table, and then ultimately you have to ask for it. And I think a lot of time, marketers in particular, get buried underneath, a growth officer or even in some crazy cases, a chief people officer or underneath a number of different things. And I think, really kind of pushing harder on the why it matters to the business, not to you. This isn't about ego.
Right.
I mean, this isn't
Agreed.
about any of that. It's about what matters to the business, and why having that presence on that team and that connection to a CEO is critical. So I think, it's a combination of proving it and asking for it, that we all probably need to be better at, and in order to get and maintain that seat at the table.
And I love the point that you made that, we're talking, growth and comfort with risk taking in cultures and leadership can exist with both, established large global entities, public
Totally.
companies, as
Yep.
well as startup emerging organizations. And obviously you've had experience inside of both of those
Yeah,
environments.
it feels like, even you think about risk taking and what stops people from wanting to do that. And I was thinking about what's the difference between risk and fear, you
Yes.
know? I mean, what is the difference? I mean, fear is more emotive, and risk is more measurable. People talk about calculated risk and data informed risk, versus fear is just what you feel. But I do think that they're close cousins.
I agree with you on that. And I think the in part the data-driven environment, data-driven marketing that we live in now, and with modern marketing, digital marketing, there's a lot more data available. And
Right.
therefore, I think more emphasis on show me the data that supports this decision over here. Well, there you're never going to have 100% certainty until
Marketing isn't that.
after you've made that decision,
If
really.
if marketing were that and we could bottle it, we'd be gazillionaires,
Yes, we
right?
would.
It's just not. Just like healthcare isn't a science. It really is. And the market changes, human beings change, businesses change. It's an evolutionary thing where you're testing and trying and measuring and repeating. And so you cannot let fear of failure or anything else get in your way when you're in the middle of those kinds of really monumental change. You have to be able to say, well, that didn't work. We'll try
Yes,
something else, right? Um,
absolutely.
and I think that there are people, and maybe those are the people that are overly fearful about things, fearful of failing, fearful of getting fired, fearful of fill in the blank. Maybe those are the people that are risk averse, right? They aren't interested in jobs like that. But frankly, risk and fear comes with everything that we do. I actually get kind of a high from it.
I was gonna ask
And
you about, like, your mindset with it, right? Because I think to your point, you almost if there is whether this is true for you personally, but just acknowledging for all human beings, if there is a little bit of fear, one almost has to sort of take that and like put it on the shelf and like acknowledge it is there, but then like view it as something else, reposition it in your mind as a challenge. And for you, there's sort of an adrenaline rush with that.
yeah, I think that with risk comes adventure, comes,
Absolutely.
energy, comes joy for me. Because the uncertainty of something, building something, launching something, making it sing is super exciting to me. And I think that people who don't find that exciting might not be ones for doing some of the companies, the crazy companies that I've done that are more risky, I suppose, if you call them that. But I don't know. I kind of think risk is part of the world. And I think becoming more fearless is something we all should strive for. I mean, I have 4 kids, and I'm sure they have moments of fear as they've gone and launched their adult lives and, their first jobs and signed leases on apartments. And, I'm sure that's a scary thing. And, but the reality is that's part of life. And so if we can all find our muscle to run into that versus run away from it. And especially, I think, as we get older, where your aging parents are more fearful today than they were 20 years ago. And I can see it with my parents, and I don't like it. And I'm not going to be that. So whether that be professionally or personally, taking on that kind of feeling that you have of, a little angst about something and muscling through it, I think builds the muscle that you need to build the next company or the next thing or the next, team or the next challenge. And I think that's what makes it fun. So,
Yeah,
um,
no,
again,
I
people
totally
are
agree
all
with you.
different. Yeah, people are all
Eh,
different. I mean, I can. This is kind of funny or not, but we started a fly fishing school with my husband out in Wisconsin. It's about an hour out of here, and I cannot tell you the number of people that have been out there and have said to him or me, "Oh, I've always wanted to do this. I've always wanted to start a
try
fly
this is
fishing school.
oh,
This,
oh,
this is,
just
yeah." Whatever it is, fill
wow.
in the blank. They probably mean
Sure.
anything, but let's just say it's a fly fishing school. I've always wanted to do this. And I always walk away from that going, well, why didn't they? Right. And so that's where I think the fear of failure, the risk averse element of all of us, if you really want to do something, do it.
I agree. I agree. And I think you're right in terms of thinking about this as a parent, right? And watching your kids, it starts even when they're little in elementary school and having to, get out there and try and the things that we can learn from our kids by watching it, right? Which is
Right.
like they do incremental things that build that muscle as you talked about that then build more resilience and the things that might have seemed scary, right, or
Right.
fearful now aren't. Why? Because we've tried it, we have experience, and confidence often comes from experience, right? And so I think this is just a great reminder in terms of if there's something, the big hairy audacious goal over here, the BHOG that the fly fishing school, whatever it is,
Whatever it
right? Like
is.
how do we take small bites
Yeah.
out of it in that direction, or take some risks in other areas that build up that resilience and that muscle that now suddenly allow us to look at that thing and say it doesn't have to be that scary anymore.
Well, even just changing jobs. A
Yeah,
lot of people, and women are frankly worse than men. Sorry.
I would. Yep, I think that's true, and I
um,
think the data would prove that
the
that's true.
data totally proves it. And, changing jobs, raising your hand for a promotion before you're really ready for it. I mean, I don't mean to slam on our femaleness, but I'm going to for just a second. People are critical of why women aren't sitting in boardrooms and why they're not C-suite and why they're not in. And I'd say yes, part of it's society, but I'd say another part of it is us.
Not asking for the
Because we
opportunity.
don't raise our hands, we don't push forward through that fear, we don't apply for jobs when we're only 80% qualified for it, because we wouldn't dare do that unless we were 120% qualified for it. But yet a man pushes through it when he's 30% qualified for it and
Right,
gets it, right?
right. Yep.
And so I think, conquering that kind of self-talk of, you said the word confidence, and I think that's it too. Conquering our confidence, conquering our fear, our little voice inside our head, and going for it. What's the worst thing that could happen?
Right.
And
It's
actually,
not that
I'd go the
bad.
other way. What's the best thing that could happen?
Yes. I mean, I've seen a lot of these sort of inspirational posts on social media lately that it's like the growth comes on the other side of something hard, right? And
It
so,
totally
like,
does.
what
And
are we
maybe that's
doing sitting
why
over here,
I love
not
it.
willing to take that
Yeah.
leap? You mentioned earlier, Marcia, you've been in this industry for a long time, and you mentioned that you are someone who goes into a culture to build something. You're good at building. I want to talk about what does it take to effectively build a brand in healthcare today.
I think it goes back to many of those things we just talked about. I
Right.
think that if you're coming into a startup, you're saying, like from the very beginning days of that.
Well, I think
or
I mean,
either?
I think we can look at it broadly. I think, I think there are many companies out there that, might even be a market leader, but their brand is sort of
Yeah.
quiet, right? It's just they're not really known as a brand. They're not a brand powerhouse. They just
Yeah.
happen to have a really great product.
Oh, well, brand is my first love and kind of what I grew up
Yes, this
in
is
the
why I wanted to
marketing
go there with you.
industry. I certainly feel like I know enough to be dangerous around all elements of marketing, but brand is what I love and have loved since 30 years ago plus. I think when you think about healthcare and the challenges that we have in marketing with healthcare, I think that having that seat at the table is critical from a business perspective to be effective. So I think if a marketing leader can have that seat and be respected at that seat and get alignment around what are we doing? What are we expected to do? What are the products that we're launching? What is our mission? What do we want to tell the world about us that's different? And if that team is cohesive and strong and respectful of each other, you can really make a lot of headway in the development of a brand. So a brand is not a logo or a color palette or a set of assets. A brand is how the company decides they're going to show up every day. And I think that if more companies, whether you be in healthcare or not, could get aligned around that and then truly stay focused on that through everything they do, I actually think that could make a pretty stellar healthcare brand in the market. And I worked at Optum and we built a pretty awesome brand. I feel good about the work that we did there. And I think we brought that mission to life really well. And I had the privilege of working with some pretty killer marketers who then took those visions and those tools and took them down into the product level and down into the service lines. And I think that the best brands are the ones that can do that and have it feel like a singular brand in the marketplace. So
Mhm.
some do it really well, some not so well. And I would guess that if we went back to the is marketing at the table, is there alignment around a platform that everybody can buy into, is there clear expectations of what we need to do in the next 2, 5, 10 years? If those companies that have that, I think are the ones that have strong brands.
Yes, I agree with you. I love what you said about how the company decides they're gonna show up every day. And I think there are perhaps some leadership teams out there that may not fully understand that, right? And that it's like this thing that marketing just has to build and run and do over here. And it requires marketing leaders to have that, I'm gonna use the word courage, but maybe it doesn't really mean, at that level,
I
but
think
the
it's
in
courage.
some cases it is the courage to say to the
Yeah,
organization, if this is who we're going to go out and tell the marketplace that we are,
we
then
better be it.
we need to
Yep,
have some tough conversations about either the offering, the customer experience, maybe culturally something over here that maybe is not fully in alignment with that external brand that you want to put out there into the world. I don't know if you have any like sort of additional thoughts around um, I've seen some organizations want to go out there and build this brand and be aggressive from a marketing standpoint, but then decide to pump the brakes
yeah,
very intentionally because the organization, the offering, everything else around it didn't really truly line up. It was
yep.
still, this message was still very aspirational, and having to have the courage to slow things down so then you can turn around and run fast.
Yeah, I think that's entirely right. And I think the reason why I'm kind of pigheaded about the whole sitting at that leadership table is because marketing is so closely linked to everything inside of the company. So it's linked to operations and it's linked to site selection. It's linked to employees. It's linked to, how employees are treated. It's linked to culture. It's linked to product design. And if all those things are not working cohesively, this brand that you've built that you're going to go out and tell the world about, it isn't delivered not only to the customer, but it's also not delivered to the employees. And I
Yes.
think that those things in the best case scenario have to operate together. And and I think CEOs that recognize the value of brand for growth are the ones I want to work with.
Yes. Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more on that one. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be listening to this and then like sending a link to their executive leadership team and saying, you need to listen to this because, right? They may be probably sitting there going, cheering and reaching through, wanting to reach through the speaker here and say, yes, yes, Marcia, this is all the
It's
right things. And
hard. It's hard
perhaps
work.
it is very hard work. And
Mhm.
perhaps they're in a culture or with a leadership team that maybe doesn't truly understand it in the way that you've just described it. And I think you're spot on. I want to also talk about how to advocate for proper resources and budget. Marketing is often, I'm just going to say it, underfunded in a lot of organizations. What strategies do you use to help an organization understand the importance of that marketing spend? And I know this is going to go back to having a seat at the table again,
It
but
totally
anything
is.
else you can offer around,
Well, I
certain
think it's
strategies?
yeah, I think it's expectation setting. So if you're doing, business planning and you're sitting at the table and you're talking about, OKRs or objectives and goals that you want as a company, I mean, this gets back to data. You can actually figure it out. It's a little
Yeah,
bit of math. Take the time, so say, okay, you want X and in this period of time, and I need to deliver X because that's what marketing does, as a sales enablement and reaching, you can go and work with a partner to figure out in order to deliver that what's the math that we need and go back to the leadership team and say, okay, yeah, this is our goal, this is what we've set up in the budget and in the pro forma, here's how we're going to do it, here's what I need in order to deliver that. And if the answer is, well, you don't have that, because I've heard that many times,
sure.
you have, instead of A, you have this B. The answer is, and this gets to your confidence in your own ability. And then now you say, well, great, that's great that you have B, not A. Then you're going to, not, that goal isn't the goal.
Looks different.
That's right. So I think there's that conversation that needs to happen. That's why marketing needs to sit at the table, because we need to be part of that dialogue of what the goal is so that the budgets match up to that and so that things are allocated correctly. And sometimes the goal might be not even achievable, right?
Sure.
So
Yep.
that you need to have that conversation. Well, that's a really aggressive goal. And based on what we need to do to get there, I don't see that happening in the next 12 months. Maybe we could do it in 18 or 24. So I think, all those things, I know that everybody says, budgets are always, marketing never gets enough. I think we always get enough, but against what we can deliver.
Yes.
So
Yep. You're right.
what's
You're right. We
enough?
gotta do the hard work.
Yeah. So if you want to work it the other way, I'm happy to do it that way too. Tell me how much I have,
Yeah.
and then I'll tell you what we can deliver.
Right. But
But
you
you
don't get to
can't
control both of those
you
things.
can't have both.
Which is the reality for some folks. I
Yeah,
do
but I
realize that.
think, so again, you've got to be able to stand up and go toe to toe a little on that. And honestly, they may not like to hear it,
I
but
agree.
for the sake of your team, you're not going to set your people up to fail.
Absolutely. You brought up team. I was gonna go there next. You excel at building teams, Marcia. And so what advice do you have for how to build a high performing marketing team?
I mean, I think it's all the things that we read about and hear about every day that people say. I don't think it's any secret. I don't think it's any science.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, I just don't think enough people do it.
fair.
so, so I guess in my world of how I go about building an effective team. And I got to tell you, I've worked with some of the best teams. So if
Yes, you
anybody that's
have.
listening to this has ever been on a team with me, I love you all because I think that you hire great talent. That's the first thing you do, right?
Yep. Yep.
You put people in roles in which they can be successful. Don't jam a square peg in a round hole. Look at what you're hiring and put them in a role that they can be successful at. That's two. Three, then you fill to the gaps of the team, recognizing your own gaps. I have lots of
Yes.
them, right?
Yep.
I have lots of gaps. And so I'll hire two people and then we'll assess what gap are we missing. Let's go find that gap and fill to that gap. So hire people, best people, let them be who they are,
Yep.
your gaps. I think then you need to support them in being the best that they can be in those roles. And that doesn't mean micromanaging them. You've hired an adult, let them be, and let them prove to you that they're capable of that. And it's not that I haven't laid people off, and it's not that I haven't had poor performers. I have, but I've at least let them try it before I step in to manage that. So give them the rope that they need to be successful because now you've put them in the right role. You've surrounded them with people who fill their gaps. So they should really be awesome, right? Let them be awesome, is what I think. Yeah.
Yeah.
um, I also think your team, as you build a team, and there might be things people would say about me as a leader that are not favorable, but I would hope the one thing that everybody would say about me is I would lay down in the fucking road for them.
Yes, you would. I've seen it. I mean, not literally, but I have seen you do this, Marcia. It's true.
And I think you have to be willing to do that, and your team needs to know you do that. Um,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and not only does that build an effective team, it also makes me feel good that I know I will do that for them. I will take the hard hits for them. I will take, somebody yelling at me. I will, so they don't have to, right? And I think, setting those clear expectations for your team as they're working is also really important. So they understand what the goals are of the organization and they understand what they do and how that contributes to that goal is really important for effective teams. And I don't want to keep going on, but I think the last thing I would say is to be kind. And
We need more kindness.
we need more kindness everywhere. And again, it's not that I haven't had hard conversations with employees. It's not that I haven't had to let people go. It's not that I haven't been angry. I have been all those things. But at the end of the day, these are human beings who have homes and children, and
Yes.
there is no reason to yell in the office. There just isn't. And kindness goes a long way. I think I'm super direct. People don't think I'm from Minnesota, and I'm not. Um, but I actually think that I am mostly kind. Maybe there are some moments I'm not.
I know that
Yeah.
to be true. I know you to be a very kind person. There are a couple takeaways from what you said that I just wanted to call out. Where you were talking about being honest about your own gaps as a leader and then thinking about how to fill the gaps with the hires that you've made, I think is a really interesting point because it's almost as though we need to be a little bit more fluid when we think about the org chart, quote unquote, right? Like
Yeah.
there might be certain roles that you know that you need, but when you hire them, then you realize, hey, there's this other role we need to create to complement, these two leaders over here that maybe just wasn't originally kind of mapped out in the org chart. So I think there needs to be some fluidity, right? And honest assessment around that. So I loved that point. And then the
Yeah, that's hard.
expectations
That's hard
piece,
in some organizations though, but
very
yes,
hard
I
because you
would
might
say
only
yes.
have a certain head count, right? A certain head
Mhm.
count that
Yeah.
you can get. And so that might be much more challenging. And then when you talked about expectations, I was nodding my head a lot there because I think there's a lot of assumptions that can be made many times, right?
Mhm.
You have a job description, you hire someone to the job description, you're very clear when you're recruiting and hiring them and bringing them into the team. But then there's this, right? There's the actual day to day work, and they get in there, and then sometimes they're not asking questions because they're new and they're figuring things out. And all of a sudden, you're 6, 12 months in, and
Yeah,
you thought they were doing this and they thought they were doing that, right? And so I think I agree with you. I've learned as a leader, clear expectations are incredibly important.
yeah,
Assume nothing. I say that a lot to my team as well. Don't make assumptions because you're not helping yourself or the organization by making assumptions because you thought you heard something or understood something to be a certain way. I think it goes back to asking a lot of questions, whether you're the leader or the employee. But yeah, those clear expectations are so important.
I think you bring up one other thing that I think is important to have an effective team. So it's all of those things that we just went through, but I also think being transparent is important. So setting up the expectations is transparency. Sharing the business goals of the organization at a high level is transparency. Sharing problems that are happening at a level that may be outside of what your team typically would know. I think that's important. I mean, it's context. And don't we all want some context to know what's happening in the company that
Yes.
we're showing up to every day? And I probably erred on the side of too much transparency in my career, but it's a fine line.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
and I think that for me as an employee, I like to know what's going on, and I just assume everybody else does too.
Yeah, and I think, I think there's a level of I think for the most part, employees really appreciate that transparency, right? Even if some of what they hear sometimes is uncomfortable, right? Or
Totally.
might be a
Yeah.
little fear-inducing
Scary,
because
right?
maybe the organization is under a lot of, financial pressure or pressure from the
Right.
board or whatever that is. But I think getting it out into the open and talking about it and having a leader, to your point, that is going to say, but I'm here for this team and we're going to, we stay focused here. We're going to be, we're going to be able to deliver for the organization and things are going to be great. I mean, not overly, pushing
No,
positivity, but
no,
standing there as a
there's a
leader.
nice balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember I worked for a company, an unnamed company, that had gone through some significant layoffs. And after the layoffs, typically got the whole team back together in a room and on
Yep.
virtual. And so I think there were 300 people, on the call, and I was, up in the front. And somebody asks a question, and they said, "Well, so is this it? Is that all the layoffs we're going to have?" And,
Mm.
there was a talk track from human capital that would have said, yes, we're through with those layoffs. And right. That's what the
Mm.
talk track probably would have said had I read it, but I probably didn't, because that wasn't my answer. My answer was, I'm going to be honest with you. This company is going to make their numbers one way or the other. They're going to make it by either earning their way to success or cutting their way to success. But at the end of the year, that's going to happen. So do your best job every day and prove your value, and we'll all be fine.
Yep.
And I had a ton of people come up to me after that and say how much they appreciated that because they didn't feel like I was just feeding them an HR line.
Yes.
And I was honest, and it wasn't meant to send people off into some kind of crazy fearful state, because
No.
I said, hey, we're all do a great job and we're in it together, right?
Yep.
And I think those kind of lessons through my career when I've done something maybe a little unconventional, that could maybe get me in trouble, later after I've had those follow-up conversations with people, I'm like, yeah, that was the right thing to do.
It pays
You
off.
know?
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. Well, I could talk to you all day, Marcia. There's so much richness in this conversation, so much advice. Before we go, I'd like to switch gears for a special segment we call the collective quickfire. I've
Oh
got
no.
five Oh, you got this. You got this. I've got five rapid fire questions to get some valuable insights here before we end. My first question is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Wow. I worked one of my first jobs. I worked for this gentleman. Maybe he's helped me be a risk taker and he didn't know it. And he told me he was laid off or moving into another role or something. And I was like horrified for him because I was just right out of college. And he said, no, it's totally fine. He goes, this is, the job of every manager and every leader should be to work themselves out of a job.
Mm, yes.
And I
Love
have
that.
taken that with me, and I'm like, yeah, your job is to empower people to be the best they can be so that if you weren't here, they'd be fine.
Yes. I love that. As a CMO, what do you typically outsource versus keep in-house?
You're not going to want me to tell you this probably, but I think that things that are critical to the business, that are business ideas, need to stay in house.
Yeah,
I think things that are trees for the forest, that a partner can bring insight because you're too close to it, should be outsourced.
makes sense to me. What's more important to you, short-term results or long-term investment in the brand?
Everybody wants both, and you can have both, so I'll say both.
Okay, fair enough. How do you, Marcia, stay updated with the latest trends and developments in health marketing? What are the different sources that you turn to?
I stay on top of a lot of the publications that do a lot of great work, and I listen to great, people talking about what they're up to. I have a great network of people who I get together with, and we hash through what's good, bad, and ugly, and what's changing and evolving. So, I think that I stay abreast of things through a variety of ways.
Yeah, I think in that CMO role in particular, I think it's really critical to have that group of peers that you can lean on, who are facing similar challenges, have gone through similar things, and just be able to talk through some of that. I think that's really important. What advice do you have for how to select the right external creative partner?
Hmm, that's a good question. Um, I have the advice that you should actually assume that everybody can do the work. I think that people spend too much time, trying to, dissect who can do the work better. I think in this day and age, all of our creative partners, whether it be PR or creative agencies, they all really should be able to do the work. So assume that positive intent. They're all going to be able to do the work and then get down to brass tacks of a relationship. Who is
Yes.
going to be there when the shit hits the fan? Because it's gonna.
Yep.
And who's going to be there with you helping to solve it? And those are the best partners. I've had some fabulous ones. You guys have definitely been one of them where you're going to have crisis, and you want to make sure the people that are in that crisis with you, that you like them, that you respect them, and that they're going to go to the mat with you. And I think if you can pick a partner that way and assume the work is going to come, that's
Yeah.
probably my best advice.
Yeah, and the ability to respectfully disagree with each other on both sides of the table, that candor, right? Because if you are in a crisis or there's a lot sort of on the line, you need to be looking at all angles, and you don't want to surround yourself with a
Yeah,
partner that's just going to be a yes person and just agree
not at
with
all.
the direction
And
that
it
you're
has
laying out.
really nothing to do with size. There used to be you only want to work with big agencies. I'm like, well, a lot of the big agency brains went and started small agencies on their own,
Absolutely.
and so I would not look at that at all. I'd only look at, their book and their work, of course, but that's table stakes. And then look at the relationship that you have with them, the mutual respect that you have, and ask them the question when something goes wrong, because it will. How do you
Yep.
handle that?
Yep. Love that. Great advice. Well, this has been really fun, Marcia. Always a pleasure getting to spend time with you. Thanks for doing this with me today. How can listeners get in touch with you?
Probably easiest way is on LinkedIn.
Excellent. Look for Marcia Miller on LinkedIn. As usual, the collective dished out some pretty great insights today. If you're feeling inspired, do us a favor and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for being part of the Health Marketing Collective, where strong leadership meets marketing excellence, because the future of healthcare depends on it. See you next time.